Welcome back to the Think and Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint, and we are going to be continuing our review of Contra Mundum's Is the Bible Sufficient for Politics? And if you've listened to part one, if you have not listened to part one, I encourage you to go back and listen to part one, where we talked about how the Bible interacts with politics and power dynamics and, God's law and things like that. So we're going to be continuing on with part two right here with, I believe, CJ Engel and Andrew Isker as they talk about, is the Bible sufficient for politics? Let's continue on.
Is not what the ideal system is. The debate of politics is what are our priorities, right? Yes. The debate of politics is what tools do we have in our current tool belt that can achieve our immediate problems, resolving our immediate problems. That's what politics is at all times. This is okay. So a good book I would recommend is actually a very normie book, Russell Kirk's The Politics of Prudence, which is a study of Robert Taft's politics. Russell Kirk is the master of the politics of prudence. He's the one that recovered, Edmund Burke, Robert Taft in the American setting. But prudence, like politics is, in the words of in Kirk, politics is the art of the possible. Politics is never about setting ideals. Now, can you have ideals? Yes. Should they guide you? Yes. But politics,
you should have them.
But politics chiefly is about resolving problems and dealing with the dynamics of group interests.
Yeah. And that's part of it, because you have this jumbled mess of like putting theonomists in their own category, right? They off to the side there, right? That's one issue. But then you have this jumbled mess where guys like Owen and Joel are they're not theonomists at all. Oh, no camera. We're losing it. We're losing our camera.
Did I disconnect it?
What'd you do, CJ? There we go. So it's a huge mess, right? Because they're kind of sort of theonomists when they want to be, but it's always a post hoc justification for a conservative version of democratic, liberal, multicultural egalitarianism, right? Always at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a clever strategy to get evangelicals to sign up for that program, because all you have to do is just find a Bible verse that you use totally out of its context and you just slap it on whatever you want to do.
Well, that's the thing.
This is what they do.
But this is the thing. I wasn't even so when I tweeted this, I actually didn't even have theonomists in mind.
No.
What I had in mind was people who countersignal Stephen Wolfe by saying, "Where did you get that in the Bible?" That's literally what I had in mind. Like these are the people that are always saying that. Oh, did I
just did a thumbs up?
Yeah, $5 for
yeah. No! Shoot! I got the wrong one.
No.
Moved. Truddle. I'm sorry, Truddle. That wasn't for you.
Truddle.
That wasn't for you, buddy.
Send him a refund.
I didn't mean to do that to you.
That's terrible.
How do we get him back?
You can't. He's in the void.
No, because that one guy that you ban all the time always comes back.
Yeah, because he's got like 35 alt accounts.
Oh shoot! I'm sorry, Truddle. We'll go back in and we'll find you.
That's rough.
Truddle, my apologies. It's so over. This is why I just don't touch the computer. I missed what you were saying. Say that again.
I don't know.
I wasn't paying attention. This is great podcast. That is the play that constantly gets run. Is we want to have globalism. We want to have egalitarianism. We want to have multiculturalism, but we want to do it conservative like.
Well, that's what I was saying. So yeah.
And here's the Bible for you.
My tweet wasn't even about the theonomists. My tweet was actually about the type of people that countersignal us by saying you are citing this author and you gave no scriptural justification for your belief here. Yeah, that's precisely.
Yeah, that's the critique.
So when people do that, I know I do that with Stephen Wolfe, and I know I do that with these guys. The idea is when you're interfering with what God told people to do, okay? God told us to take dominion, okay? That's a prerogative, and it's a right, and it's a privilege, it's a responsibility given by God. When you take that away from people, you need to have a God-given reason to do that, right? Because God said I can do this. Who are you to say that I can't? And when you say, well, Junius said, or Aristotle says, or Aquinas, the latest theory from Aquinas, the 4 categories of law, says, then for the rest of us, that's not good enough. That's not even remotely good enough for you to take away my right to dominion, right? And this is where we get a lot of this is where we assert that man does not have the right to create new law, right? He only has the right to enforce extant law given by God in his word, because God ties his word to justice. He tells the magistrate, I just want you to do justice. And he praises people who do justice. And God criticizes people who engage in things that are other than justice, like here in Jeremiah 22, when God criticizes, let's do the LSB. That's what I've been using. When God criticizes the son of Josiah, verse 11 of Jeremiah 22, for thus says Yahweh in regard to Shallum, the son of Josiah, and there's a footnote on Shallum, Jehoaz, son of Josiah, king of Judah, who became king in the place of Josiah, his father. As remember, Josiah instituted a lot of reforms. He was one of the greatest kings who oversaw the greatest reforms and the greatest Passover that any of the kings had ever seen. And the Bible, and both Chronicles and Kings, indicates that Passover was the greatest Passover, and that none of the kings had ever seen a Passover like that, except in the days of the judges, where it seemed apparently was commonplace. So here we go. Jeremiah 22:11. Thanks again to my friend Matt Wearsome. He posted this passage on his Facebook the other day, so shout out to Matt. But in the place where they took him away into exile, let me just start over. For thus says Yahweh in regard to Shallum, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, who became king in the place of Josiah's father, who went forth from this place. He will never return there. But in the place where they took him away into exile, there he will die and not see this land again. Woe to him who builds his house without righteousness and his upper rooms without justice, who uses his neighbor's services without pay and does not give him his wages, who says, sounds familiar, sounds like our government, who says, I will build myself a roomy house with spacious upper rooms and cut out its, this is the United States government, and cut out its windows, paneling it with cedar and painting it bright red. Do you become a king because you are competing in cedar? Did not your father eat and drink and do righteousness and justice? Then it was well with him. He pled the cause of the afflicted and needy, and then it was well. Is not that what it means to know me, declares Yahweh. And again, let's go to Isaiah 16. Give counsel, grant justice, make your shade like night at the height of noon, shelter the outcast, do not reveal the fugitive. Let the outcasts of Moab sojourn among you, be a shelter to them from the destroyer. When the oppressor is no more and destruction has ceased, and he who tramples underfoot has vanished from the land, then a throne will be established in steadfast love, and on it will sit in faithfulness in the tent of David, one who judges and seeks justice and is swift to do righteousness. So, and again, back to Jeremiah 22, he pled did not your father eat and drink and do justice and righteousness? Then it was well with him. He pled the cause of the afflicted and needy. Then it was well. So you often see God telling the civil magistrate, I don't want you to be involved in politics. Forget about the politics. Stop with the politics. I want you to do justice. I want you to do righteousness. That's what I want from you. That's what he's telling the civil magistrate of the day. And there's no place in the Bible where God gives orders to people to do trade-offs. You know what I'm saying? The civil magistrate, like a trade-off, do a trade-off here. It's always, for God, it's always, I want you to do justice and righteousness. And that's why people say, when it comes to Stephen Wolfe and the Christian nationalists, when they start saying things like, well, we need to do this. And the theonomists are like, I thought it was all about justice and righteousness around here. That's what I thought it was about. That's what I thought the civil magistrate was supposed to be doing. Why is he worrying about my taxes? Why is he worrying about prison? That's not just. Why is he worrying about all these extra biblical things that have nothing to do with justice and righteousness, but have more to do with resolving group interests? Or doing the best trade-off with the options and the resources that we have right now? Why are we concerning our governments, or asking our governments to be concerned with things that they should not have any business? And when people like Stephen Wolfe, in his podcast on non-legislative theonomy, he was talking about all these responsibilities of the government, like to control fishing and, roads. And what if an ugly warehouse goes up across the street? The state's got to get involved and makes my little hamlet really ugly. And, who's going to do the roads and, all this kind of stuff. All these things that the civil magistrate should not be concerned with. And the Christian nationalists are all over this. And one thing that just really frustrates me about the Christian nationalists is that very few of them will actually argue and criticize the alphabet departments. That's not their platform. I don't think they want to get rid of the alphabet platforms. I could be wrong. But so far, they're not talking about getting rid of the FDA. They're not talking about, if they get into power, right, and they get the Christian Prince in there, maybe there is a Christian nationalist out there let's get rid of all the alphabet departments. But they rarely ever talk about the alphabet departments. I never hear Stephen Wolfe talk about the alphabet departments. And my concern with Christian nationalism is it's Christian statism. It's Christian flavored statism. That what they really want is not just to have their own people in these places. And that's what I'm afraid with this Overton window silliness that's going on. That with the Christian nationalists, that when push comes to shove and we get enough people and we get enough power and influence, it's going to, the curtain gets revealed and, hey, let's get our guy in office. So that he can do all of the injustice that the pagans were doing too. Just in the name of Christianity. Because, hey, it's all about trade-offs. It's about, doing what we have. This is the government that we have. And the Christian nationalists it just seems to me that they don't want to really change the government. They want a dictator with all of the same structures in place. I could be way wrong about that. Maybe they do want to get in there and clean house and get rid of all these alphabet departments. But I just don't hear that from them. What I hear is, let's get our Christian prince into power and let's get rid of the immigrants. And that's basically it. Outside of that, what is really their platform? That just seems to me to be the thing I keep hearing over and over again. Every time I stick my head in the Christian nationalist room, it's let's get rid of the immigrants and let's get a Christian dictator in there. And I very rarely, they're not I'm sure there are Christian nationalists out there abolish the IRS. But are there any Christian nationalists? This is a question of you, Christian nationalists. Are any of you out there saying taxation should not be forced? Taxation should be like tithe. It should be voluntary. Because if not, then I think your arguments are completely useless. Because as long as we have to give our money to the government, completely irrelevant to their performance as a government, if their performance as a government is not dependent upon our money, but it's ultimately irrelevant. They can persecute us and we still have to give them our money. Then the Christian nationalism, it's not going to go anywhere. That's not freedom. That's not freedom. That's not liberty. And the Christian nationalists, I don't hear this unified voice of, we want liberty around here. We want prosperity and liberty and freedom. It's we want peace and we want order and we want the immigrants gone. And that's just such a bizarre thing I keep hearing from them. It's over and over again. And I don't know why. But when we're talking about the responsibility of the magistrate, God keeps saying again and again, I want justice. I want righteousness from the civil magistrate. I want you to judge. Please judge. Well, God's not saying please. I think it's the KJV words, this passage here in Isaiah 16. Is it, let's go with the New Geneva. I like the New Geneva better than I like the KJV. Where are you, New Geneva? Where's the New Geneva translation? Huh. Oh, there it is. Okay, verse 5. And in mercy shall the throne be prepared, and he shall sit upon it in steadfastness in the tabernacle of David, judging and seeking judgment and hasting justice. This is a good thing. This is what the magistrate should be doing. Judging, seeking justice, giving judgment. Judgment. Judging. The purpose of the magistrate is to use God's law to judge when people bring a case before them, to give people justice. Justice and justice shalt thou pursue, right? And the Christian nationalists, justice is totally not on their purview. This is kind of irrelevant. As I was telling my friend Ethan the other day, we were talking about this, and the Christian nationalists is what I believe is the Christian nationalists seek the way to peace and order through the force of the state, through the ordering of the state. We're going to get peace and order, just kind of like a father who tells the kids who are complaining, hey, he hit me. No, he hit me first. And they start fighting, and the father just says, everyone be quiet. Stop it. Everyone be quiet. And that's how the Christian nationalists think we're going to get peace around here. But the theonomists are saying, no, the only way we're going to get peace around here is if you say to those kids, what happened? He hit me. No, he hit me. Okay, who's lying and telling the truth? And then the father seeks justice and finds out who the perpetrator is, and then he dispenses justice and discipline. And then later, he's going to have peace down the road, long-term peace. Because the more you cover up injustices in a family of the siblings between each other, the more that you cover this up. And the more you say, stop fighting, I just want quiet. But Dad, he just quiet, I don't care, just stop. That's the Christian nationalists. But the theonomists are trying to say, listen, the father has to give the children justice. When they come to him and there's a problem, he's got to establish justice in the house, because these kids are going to get older, and these injustices that were not resolved between them are going to create bitterness and resentment down the road. And then as they're adults, these little cracks are going to become huge fault lines and huge canyons of resentment and anger and bitterness and mistrust. Whereas if you resolve them as children, you're going to have long-term peace later on down the road. And that's how the theonomists are saying the road to peace and order is justice. That's how we get peace and order around here. And the Christian nationalists are saying, no, the road to peace and order is just for the state to come in and tell everyone to be quiet. That's what I keep hearing from them. Justice is totally not on the purview. Oh, we can't do justice right now. I know the Bible says this. I know the Bible says that, but we can't do that right now. We just have to use the tools that we have right now. And understand this seems to me a pragmatic argument. Like, we can't do Mosaic, we can't do Mosaic justice, but we should be arguing for it, though, right? Right? When the civil magistrate comes and says, "Hey, what do you guys want?" There should be a unified voice from the Christians. We want justice. We want you to do justice. No, we don't want you to solve the problems of conflicting group interests. That's not your responsibility. We'll figure it out. We'll do that. Okay? You give us justice when we come to you and say, my neighbor wronged me. That's what we want you to do. Is that too much to ask? I don't know. Do I have to read Aristotle or something like that? I mean, to get to that conclusion? Or I mean, if Aristotle says, no, that's not how justice is done, am I wrong? So the path to peace and order, the theonomists believe, is justice. If you don't have justice in the land, you're never going to have peace and order. But if you try to skip justice and go right for peace and order, you're not going to get any one of those three.
Tika Stevens' book said, "Where's all the Bible? Why isn't there any Bible in here?" And it's like, well, he quotes like hundreds of theologians and 400 pages worth of it, but people whose minds and thoughts are all shaped by the study of Scripture and the study of God. And that's not enough.
Well, yeah, it's not enough. I mean, we're talking about people's lives. And if you read Stephen Wolf's book, we're talking about how to run a nation. And when you don't use the Bible to talk about how to run a nation, because the Bible definitely talks about how to run a nation, that's one of its main subjects. It's one of the main themes of the Bible, how to run a nation, God's law, that talks about how to run a nation. And when you don't quote God's law, and you quote Aristotle and Aquinas, and you don't quote Moses at all, maybe you quote Moses like once or twice. All the theologians in the world, if we went to them, would they be a unified voice? Like, yeah, that's a good move. When you're talking about running the nation, just quote us. Don't forget about the Bible. Just quote us. That'll be good enough. Is that something that they would say? Is that a message that they send? I don't think so.
You got to have a proof text for every little point that you're making. You got to have a proof text.
When you're talking about interfering with somebody else's life, yes, I do believe you need a proof text. When you're talking about interfering with somebody else's life, if you're talking about making policies that affect millions of people, I don't want to hear reformer. I want to hear chapter and verse. Because we cannot be carting people away to prison. I keep saying this. We cannot be fining them. We can't be taking money from them. We cannot be forcing people as a civil magistrate to do something based on a tradition. God's orders in the Scriptures is always, I want you to do justice to the civil magistrate. Do justice. And the Christian Nationalists are like, yeah, it's kind of irrelevant. Just let's get peace and order and whatever we got to do that. Even Stephen Wolf's book, he says, hey, sometimes, rights got to be suspended. They're not the end of themselves. So sometimes you can take away people's rights only with extreme caution and wisdom. So the Christian Nationalists are like, his justice is like irrelevant. Your rights are kind of irrelevant. It's just whatever we got to do to get peace and order around here is what we got to do.
To do it, like that's the point that you're making is. Yeah. To think through these things,
totally.
You can't proof text your way through it.
Right.
That's not how it works. And I mean that was my argument with it is like you've got a king, right?
Okay, what did he say there?
You got to have a proof text for every little point that you're making. You got to have a proof text to do it. Like that's the point that you're making is. Yeah. To think through these things,
totally.
You can't proof text your way through it.
I want to bring up a passage here. And if you follow Psalm 1, if you read Psalm 1, you take it seriously, you are going to be asking the question, where'd you get that idea from? Right? Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. Now, I know the Christian Nationalists, they straight up, they do not incorporate this verse into their thinking. And from this podcast, you can tell these guys, like they're thinking about Junius, they're thinking about Burke, they're thinking about all these theologians and politicians and Romans and Greeks throughout the centuries, they are not meditating on God's law day and night. That just does not describe them at all from what they're saying. They don't talk about the Scripture. They don't bring the Scripture up. They don't talk about God's law. It's just not on their mind. And verse 2 says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. It's not just an idea. He delights in the law of God. He's like, this is a really good idea. It's not just a good idea, but it's the only idea, right? But this is a really enlightening thing to my life, the law of God, and to everyone else. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. And the New King James Version gives a really, really interesting footnote to this. A lot of things really came together for me. So, but in his delight is in the law of the Lord. This is New King James Version, and on his law he meditates day and night. Now, the New King James translators put a footnote in here that I think is really interesting, that every man can relate to. On his law he meditates day and night. The footnote is ponders by talking to himself, right? And for the ladies listening to this podcast, have you ever come across your man or a man in your life who's kind of staring off into space and having a conversation with himself, right? And you're like, what are you doing? Well, he's talking to himself. He's pondering by talking to himself. That's how the psalmist views, and I know every guy if you've ever taken a shower, you've done this, where you replay conversations in your mind, or you're thinking about something you might say or should have said or what have you. You're pondering by talking to yourself. And every serious thinker, I think, does this. Every unserious thinker, I think, does this. And so that's what we're supposed to be doing with the law of God. We ponder it by talking to ourselves about it. And these guys, if you can describe these guys as people who meditate on God's law day and night, well, my hat's off to you. But from what they're saying, this does not describe these guys at all with respect to them. It doesn't. It does not sound like they delight in the law of God and that they meditate. Because I've seen people, I've talked to people who delight in the law of God and who meditate on it day and night. This is still a good thing. Christ's resurrection doesn't change this chapter, okay? Jesus, and the apostles and the apostolic age and dispensationalism, it doesn't change anything about this chapter. It's okay that your delight is in the law of the Lord. In fact, it's a good thing. In fact, it's a holy and good and just thing. And you are still required to meditate upon it day and night. It's not an option. You should be working to get yourself to a place where I'm meditating on God's law day and night. So this should describe every Christian. You delight in the law of God and you meditate upon it day and night. Not Aristotle, not Junius, not Aquinas. That's not who you're meditating on day and night. The law of God, day and night. It totally fills your thoughts. And there's nothing else that fills your thoughts like this. And if you can find me one Christian nationalist who you can describe that this person delights in the law of God and on his law he meditates day and night, yeah, that definitely describes a Christian nationalist movement. My hat's off to you. I'd say you're probably thinking about a theonomist.
Right. That's not how it works. And I mean, that my argument with it is, like, you've got a king, right?
So he brings up a really great example here, and you understand where he's coming from with this example.
Named Solomon, and he's faced with a situation, right? You've got two women, two harlots, right? One's holding a dead baby, the other's holding a living baby, and both of the women claim the living baby's theirs. All right, Solomon, chapter and verse in Deuteronomy or Leviticus, what do you do? Yeah. Give me chapter and verse to tell me what to do. And it's like, there isn't one. Yeah. Right? There isn't one. And it's not a coincidence that after God appears to Solomon and Solomon asks for wisdom and God gives it to him, But that's the very first thing that happens.
But what did Solomon, like the context of Solomon asking for wisdom? What was he asking for wisdom to be a good politician and to solve conflicting group interests? But when Solomon asks for wisdom, he says, "Give me wisdom to judge these people." And the Christian nationalists, that's not what they want the magistrate to do. It's not what they want him to do. They want him to come in and clean house and establish order and peace and tell everybody to shut up, and just so we can have, the 50s around here again or whatever. I don't want to, I don't want to be unfaithful to what they're saying, but that's what it sounds like to me anyway. He said, "Give me wisdom to judge these people." That's what the magistrate should be doing. Asking God for wisdom to judge, not wisdom to be a good politician.
Right. The Bible's not randomly ordered.
Yeah.
And right, what does he do? He says, "I'm going to cut the baby in half." Right. Everyone knows the story. And right, there's no whoa. Solomon, you can't do that, man. You don't have the authority to do that. The Bible doesn't say you could do that. There's no proof text saying you could threaten that. Well, I'm not actually going to do it. He didn't do it, but
There is no provision for that.
there's no provision. The king is not allowed to do that.
Right.
Right. And I mean, to go even further, right? He's threatening murder, and
Yeah.
like you're not allowed to do that. That's a sin to threaten murder.
Yeah.
Right.
The question becomes, did God sin by telling Moses to, kill his son, by threatened murder and all that kind of stuff? And well, no, he didn't. Solomon knew his responsibility as a judge, or really as a king, was just to judge. That was his responsibility, was to judge. And when he asked for God, to give him wisdom so that he could judge, he knew that his responsibility was to give these women justice. And that's what he did. If he threatened murder to give justice, the end of that passage, I think that's First Kings. Was that First Kings 5? No, it's not First Kings 5. Uh-oh. I don't know where those sounds came from. I always get confused. Okay. That's First Kings 3. Okay. At the end of the passage, it's interesting what the result of that passage was. "And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice." Now, this is, again, the Christian nationalists do not really care if the civil magistrate is administering justice. They want peace and order, and if that means denying people justice, then that's what it means. That's what Stephen Wolfe argues for in his book, that if you have to sacrifice justice to get peace and order, it's okay, because that's the responsibility, right? Because rights can be suspended. So if I have to be unjust to take away your rights and give you injustice so that I can give you peace and order, it's okay, right? So justice is incidental to the magistrate. It's about peace and order. But verse 28 says, "And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice." Not peace and order. They feared the king because they saw that's what he was all about. He was all about administering justice after he gave this verdict. That's his responsibility. That was the responsibility given by God. And Proverbs 25:2. "It is the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search things out." right? To search out a matter. That's what Solomon's doing. He's searching out a matter. And if you go to Job 29, as he was being a judge, verse 16, I was a father to the needy, and I searched out the cause of him whom I did not know. Right? So that's what a judge does. He searches out the matter. He investigates. And he finds out the root. That's what the root of the problem. That's what a judge is supposed to do. And that's what Solomon was doing. Right? He did have a chapter and verse about his responsibility. Right? Because the Bible says in Deuteronomy 17, you shall inquire diligently, verse 4. It is told and you hear of it, then you shall inquire diligently. Right? That's what Solomon's doing. He's inquiring diligently. He's using a threat to inquire diligently into the matter. He does have chapter and verse. That's what he's doing about his responsibility. Right? There's many ways to search and to inquire diligently and search out a matter. Right? So you have this idea of the judge that he's supposed to search out a matter. And that's part of his purview, that's part of his responsibility. So he does actually have chapter and verse of what he's doing. He's searching out a matter. And that looks differently to a lot of people about how to go about that, but wisdom is heavily involved. And which is why especially the non-legislative theonomists argue that non-legislative theonomy is the one that puts the heaviest premium on wisdom in our magistrates, whereas every other system puts a very low premium of wisdom on the magistrate. What we look for is cunning, connections, acumen, ability to make deals. We don't love Trump because he's wise. We love Trump because the art of the deal, all that kind of stuff. He's a good businessman. Blah 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 blah. But every now and then, I guess you could say maybe there is a reference to wisdom. His 4D chess and all that kind of stuff. He's really smart. But ultimately, the wisdom aspect of Trump is not primary. It's tertiary, secondary, something like that to the other things that we wanted to do, like get rid of all the immigrants.
And yet he does it and is able to untie this Gordian knot, right, instantaneously.
I want to point out
that's
I want to point out too that the Christian Nationalists would have never let this case. They would have never let this case come before them. Their civil magistrate, this would have never got to them. This would have never come to a Christian Nationalist magistrate. Why? Because verse 16 in 1 Kings 3, now 2 women who were harlots came to the king. They would have outlawed prostitution as soon as they got in office. They would have made it a crime to be a prostitute. They would have never gotten to them. They would say, okay, new rule. I'm the boss. I'm the order of society. I'm going to tell you guys specifically how to live. So can't do prostitution. Anyone does prostitution, can't do Mosaic punishment on it because Mosaic punishment laws does not outlaw harlotry. It's not a crime to be a harlot. There is no punishment. There's punishments about lying about your virginity when you get married. I mean, all these things are related to marriage. But if a woman goes out and is a prostitute, there's no punishment. Obviously, if 2 women who are harlots, and there's Solomon giving them justice. He didn't arrest them. He didn't punish them. They were harlots. They were prostitutes. And he gave them justice. What Christian Nationalists would never give justice to a harlot. Never. They would have outlawed prostitution before this case even got close to them. Oh, you're a prostitute, huh? 2 prostitutes saying the baby. Okay, arrest them both. And baby, give it to the state because we didn't get rid of what is that called? What is the alphabet organization? The people who take your kids all the time. Oh, why can't I remember who they are? I'm kind of glad because I hate thinking about them. But give them to the state. They're now this child is now a ward of the state. That's what the Christian Nationalists would do. Would not give these 2 prostitutes justice. Wouldn't even hear the case. Are you a prostitute? Yes, jail. Are you a prostitute? Yes, jail. Don't need 2 or 3 witnesses. That's biblical law. We're not about biblical law. Got to have peace around here. got to have the good of society. It's not good for society to have prostitutes. So, since I'm in charge of the good of the society, I'm the magistrate to jail with you because it's not good. It's not for the common good to have prostitutes running around here. So see you later. It would have never gotten to a Christian nationalist magistrate. And later, Andrew, he talks about that a little bit. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but he talks about it a little bit. And he says, given the Mosaic punishment, that there is no Mosaic punishment for harlotry. Obviously. There's none. But this is what happens when you don't meditate on the law of God day and night. You think that there are punishments for things for which there are no punishments. There is no Mosaic punishment for being a harlot.
That's an example of good kingship, and he doesn't cite a proof text to say here's why it's good. Mm-hmm. I mean, of course, the story itself is a proof text. I'm doing this right now, but he doesn't cite a proof text to give himself permission to do this. Where it's like so many people, they want this like regulative principle of all of life.
Yeah,
and
looking for a regulative principle on the magistrate. What's the magistrate's responsibility? We have it in the Bible, and that's what we're always quoting, because we know the responsibility of the magistrate. And when people come along and quote the Greeks or the Romans or even the reformers and start handing out responsibilities to the magistrate that are outside what God told the magistrate to do, we have a problem. And that's why we say, where'd you get that idea from? Because it's got to come from the Bible, right? The Bible, all authority is from God. And if you're quoting people who are not God, who give people authority, we're like, where did you get this idea from? That's the question.
And so like mundane tasks, obvious, and this is why we make the argument like, well, yeah, plumbing or computer repair or whatever, right? Nobody thinks that way about mundane things, but when it comes to the exercise of power, right, then we want a proof text for literally every single thing, right? And it's not to say the Bible does not have authority over the plumber or the computer repairman or the king. Mm-hmm. It does. Mm-hmm. It absolutely does. Right? There are things those men cannot do at all. They are not allowed to do. But there's a lot more yeses or potential yeses than there are no's. Right? There's very few no's, actually, in God's word. And the whole rest of the world is a potential yes. And you have to have the wisdom to know which yes to select.
Yeah. Well, another way to say that is those in power have the decision to decide exceptions.
Yeah.
So
yes.
Like that's what it means to have sovereign power, right?
Yeah. In that example, the sovereign is deciding the exception. Well, yeah, normally it's not good to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And like both those women took it seriously. Mm-hmm. Right? They didn't. None of them said, "Well, you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that." Right? And one said, "Yeah, good, yeah, kill that baby." The other was like, "Give it to her," right? And so neither one questioned whether they had the authority to do it. Yeah. And so, obviously, there's an argument from silence, but it's so much of this.
People understood again the responsibility of the magistrate of their day. They knew what he was supposed to do. Ever since Exodus 18, when Exodus says, Exodus but Jethro says, and they will judge the people at all times, verse 22, and it will be that every major matter they will bring to you, but every minor matter they themselves will judge. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you, right? So people, ever since this, knew the responsibility, or even before this, really, because Moses was judging before this. But ever since the time of Job, maybe they knew the responsibility of what the top guy was supposed to be doing. He was supposed to be making judgments between disputants, and they did have a chapter and verse for his responsibility. They knew what he was supposed to be doing. Again, at the end, they knew that this was tied to justice. At the end of the chapter, and all Israel heard of the judgment which the king rendered, and they feared the king, for they saw the wisdom of God was in him to administer justice. That's his responsibility. They knew that his responsibility was to administer justice, and when they saw this judgment, they said, okay, he's doing his job. That's his responsibility, administer justice. Something that is not within the purview of the Christian nationalists. They're not arguing for justice. Justice is not something on their that is a major talking point for them. It's peace and order and the good of society and the common good. That's what they're arguing for. and the theonomists keep going back. We got to have justice. When it comes to the magistrate, we've got to have justice. If we don't have justice, then everything else is a wash. But I think the Christian nationalists, again, they keep saying, it seems to me that they keep saying, no, if we can have peace and order without justice, we can skip justice and get to peace and order. And that's what a lot of Stephen Wolf's book is about. Let's skip justice, because we're going to skip over the whole thing that talks about how to do justice. That's God's law, right? Loving God and loving your neighbor, the two greatest commandments. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about reformers. And we're going to talk about their view on all this. Let's assume the Reformed tradition. And we're just going to skip over the justice aspect of this whole thing and go right to what the Christian prince should be doing. Responsibilities that are completely outside of the responsibilities given by God to the civil magistrate. And Stephen Wolf's book is filled with this idea of let's skip justice right now. We can't do it right now. Got to sacrifice your rights sometimes, and let's go straight for let's skip justice and go straight for straight for peace and order. And maybe we'll get justice along the way, hopefully. But if we skip over God's law and we don't talk about God's law in a book about how a nation is supposed to be run, we're going to skip over justice, because we don't know what justice is without God's law. Because what is sin? Sin is lawlessness. What law? If we don't talk about God's law in a book about how to run a country, then we don't know what sin is. We don't have a working definition of sin, and that's what the five spheres: business, individual, family, church, state, or magistrate. That's what they're trying to deal with, this problem of sin, not clashing group interests. That's for the group interests to figure out. That's for the groups to figure out. Okay, and they can use a judge to do that, but ultimately that's not the responsibility of the judge. The judge is to administer justice, not a new warehouse went up across the street and it's ugly, and the group interest of the warehouse owners or the business, right? That's a group of people versus the community who doesn't like the eyesore. That's a clashing of group interests. Guess what the civil magistrate has to say about that? Absolutely nothing. Nothing. The only thing is to say he has the right to do that. He's not being unjust. He's not doing anything wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. So I can't act. And I won't act. Sorry that your little community, and you might be thinking like this is a silly example, but this is a real example brought up by Stephen Wolf in one of his videos. Like, this is why we need the government. This is why we need legislation, because of these problems. I'm not making this up. But this is what the Christian nationalists keep saying. Like, they keep on bringing up these problems that are not real problems, that have nothing to do with sin, just convenience. And the magistrate must always have an eye towards sin and injustice. That's his responsibility given to him by God. But the Christian nationalists are like, well, the real problem is inconveniences between group interests. That's why we need politics, I guess.
Is that we haven't thought through like fundamental questions of politics, of wielding power. We've been, coddled in democratic liberalism our entire lives, where we just assume, well, at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. I don't really like the Democrats, but we're all Americans here, and the best people. I don't like Bill Clinton, but he's gonna, he's our president. And everybody just.
That seems to be one of the greatest thing about the Christian nationalists. They know we're at war. There's a war going on, and the Christian nationalists know it. They're not neutral, and they are fighting a war. I just don't think their cause is a just cause to get the magistrate to produce peace and order. They should be fighting for the magistrate to administer justice. That's just my personal opinion.
Just thinks all right, it's all going to work out okay. Yeah, you win some, you lose some. And politics has returned. And it's not going away.
Yeah, politics has returned, and what that mean? What are the implications of that? Is like this realization, and I think a lot of people are coming to this. I mean, I left libertarianism. I think libertarianism is like the most consistent, logical, and rational application of like classical liberal themes. I think libertarianism is like the perfect deductive result of applying liberalism to its logical conclusion. So I was very much of this background where everything had to be logically justified. They applied in all circumstances. There are these strictures that could never be breached by the state. That's the methodology of universalism. That's the methodology of propositionalism. But what happens when you begin to realize that politics has returned and that we can't actually triumph over politics is that you realize that the political realists, the Machiavellians, had a better grasp of the dynamics of power. And like this is why like you and I and Stephen and others get in trouble a lot, because we'll refer to things like trade-offs. A lot of politics is trade-offs. You have to make judgment calls where there's no perfect answer. I think that the rationalistic, propositionalistic, universalist mind hates that. They hate trade-offs.
I mean, we're just so far outside of the biblical responsibility of the magistrate. We're talking about trade-offs, and that's why we say, where did you get that idea from? Does the Bible talk about trade-offs? No. And the question is, okay, why? If it's so important, this subject of trade-offs in politics is so important, then why didn't the Bible address it the way that you want it to be addressed? Right? Maybe because the magistrate shouldn't be doing that. I mean, it's not much really you can do for somebody who is like, well, yeah, Machiavelli had power dynamics better than this other thing over here, better than whatever standard you want to put up over there. Machiavelli was better. And then I have over here 1 Corinthians 3:20 saying this. Let no one deceive himself. If any among you thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool that it may become wise. For the wisdom of this world is folly with God. For it is written, he catches the wise in their craftiness. And again, the Lord knows the thoughts of the wise, that they are futile. Question. Are the thoughts of Machiavelli futile? I'm going to go with yes, they are. Where Machiavelli is right, he agrees with the Bible. Where he's wrong, he disagrees with the Bible. But ultimately, he's futile in his reasoning. Machiavelli, he hates wisdom. Machiavelli hates wisdom. He's at war with wisdom. He was at war with God. He's got nothing to offer in the discussion of the role of the civil magistrate. Nothing. Evil men do not Proverbs 25. Evil men do not understand justice, but the righteous understand it completely. So he's got nothing to contribute. It should be looked at. He should be looked at as like a novelty. Oh, that's interesting. Thank you, Mr. Machiavelli. Have a seat. Here's a cookie. Now let the people who know the Bible and the Scriptures talk about power dynamics. Because you don't know what you're talking about. Wisdom is folly to you. You hate wisdom. And if you came across it, you'd hate it. Proverbs 8:36, talking about wisdom crying aloud in the street. And the chapter ends with, but he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. Machiavelli loves death. Okay? He does. He loves death. So ultimately, whatever he has to say is is secondary to what the Bible has to say on the matter of power dynamics. Machiavelli hated the Scriptures, and he hated what the Bible had to say about servant leadership, about let who is first among you be last. He hated that. He thought it was foolishness. So why are we going to this guy for any sort of wisdom? What are we doing here, man? That's my problem with Christian nationalism. It's like I go everywhere for wisdom, knowledge, except the Bible, except God's law. It's an idea among many.
They want everything to be black and white. This is the application of this ethical rule to this situation. And I don't think that that's a good understanding of the political in society. I think that's probably a better understanding of legal theory. And, you could even argue that natural law has a lot of this universalism to it. And I think there are universal moral codes, but politics is not that. Politics is distinct from that. Politics is the clash of group interests. It's the dynamics of power within the context of legal systems, within the context of military threats, within the context of cultural revolution. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is like people like Neil Shenvi and Joel Berry and James Lindsay. They'll always get mad at us for using what they call critical analysis in opposing liberalism. Mm-hmm. But what's actually happening is people are realizing that underneath this veil of liberalism lies a complex of hegemonies, and it lies a complex of power structures. And these things are not the invention of the New Left. These things were very well understood by Edmund Burke. Like if you read his opposition to the French Revolution, it's just full of this recognition that society is built on structures and hegemonies and power dynamics, and it's all intricately tied together. And when you pull one string, you unravel the whole thing. And I think that's sort of what liberalism did. And I don't think we can fall back into that. I think that you're right, that we are experiencing a realization that politics has triumphed, that history did not conquer politics, and that politics needs to be dealt with realistically and in terms of real world threats. So,
this is again the theonomist. How about we deal with politics biblically, not realistically, biblically, because we don't know what realistically means outside of the Bible. We just don't know what it means. We have no working definition of what realistically means outside of the Scriptures. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge, right? That's where we start, and we want to deal with politics biblically because the Bible does talk about these things. It does talk about the responsibility of the magistrates, and we're talking about giving the magistrates responsibility that they should not have. And that's the problem with the theonomists. How did we ever get the Reformation? Was not the Pope doing the same thing? His papal bulls, his favors, was he not dispensing politics? Was he not a politician first before he was anything else? Was he not dealing with conflicting group interests all the time? If you study the popes and what they were doing, were they not politicians? Until the Christians came along and said, you know what? That's not your responsibility to be doing and saying these things. They rejected the Pope and his self-given responsibilities and said, that's not your responsibility. Here's your responsibility. God gives you your responsibility. And we want you to do exactly what God has told you to do. That's what you should be doing. How did Martin Luther nail the 95 Theses if he did not know the responsibility of the Pope? Because he saw that the Pope was going outside of his responsibilities. That this Pope was doing injustice, he was doing wickedness. And if Martin Luther never understood what the true responsibility of the Pope was, then he would never have nailed those 95 Theses. But if someone came along to Martin Luther and said, which they did come along and say, it's this responsibility. Is conflict. I mean, if we don't have the Pope, how are we going to resolve group interests? But the Christians of that day saw the abuse of the office of the Pope and said, no more. But how do they know it was an abuse? In the same way that they had a reformation to the Pope where they said to the church authorities, sit down and you do your job. And one of the results of that Reformation was the United States of America, a very decentralized Christian experiment. But in the same way that we had that, in the same way that we had a Reformation in the Christians, where they stood up and said, "Okay, that's not your job. Okay, you're abusing your office. You can't be doing these things." We need the Christians to stand up and say to the state, "Hey, you're abusing your office. You can't be doing these things." But the Christian nationalists, it's just they don't seem to be saying that to me. They don't. They want the same offices. They just want Christians in there doing it with more power to the executive branch. It's just what it seems to me. There's my first monologue of our entire career together.
Yeah. You should do more of those. Matt, I think this is good response. I don't think that's the objection. You know what I was saying. The objection is that Solomon wouldn't go to Dagon, the god of the Philistines, to get the wisdom to make that decision. Right? No, like he's not going to Dagon, or we're not suggesting that he's going to Dagon. But neither do I say that we should use sources that are forbidden. Right? Yeah, there are things that the Bible forbids us to use.
Well, I mean, like, look at the early church. Look at how they Christianized Greek philosophy.
Yeah, like, we're not allowed to think about that. But like, that's forbidden, CJ.
But look at John 1. That was obviously a refutation of the misunderstanding of the world metaphysic as it stood within the Greek context, and it was obviously an application. He borrowed from that and Christianized it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, the Logos is Jesus. Is God.
Yes, right. And he used words that they would understand within their context.
Yeah,
the Bible alone, even for John, like this is another thing. You know who's actually good at this is the Davenant guys. They really understand this very well, actually. That that the scriptures actually.
So the difference between that is what I think is the difference is, John took the Greek philosophy and he Christianized it to the people of his day to explain what was going on. He used a concept that was popular at that time to communicate the reality of Christ, and he Christianized it. The difference that we're talking about here is that what the Christian nationalists are arguing for is that we should take pagan philosophies and force them on other people, force them using the state. Using pagan philosophies of how the government should work, this is because that's what they are, pagan philosophies of how the government should work, and force it upon a nation. Now everyone has to follow it and make law based off these. It's a little bit different using a concept that was popular at the time to communicate the truth about Christ, and using the paradigms that they would understand to communicate who Christ is. And you have that. And then over here you have, let's take Aristotelian philosophy and force it on everybody, because since Aristotle and Aquinas and all these other guys say here's the responsibility of the state, they should be doing this, then we should take that and then force the entire country to do that as well. The magistrates should be doing the responsibilities given to them by pagans and not given to them by God. A little bit different in the understanding of what's going on with the pagan philosophies.
Actually repeat and echo natural law.
They're going to clip that and use that.
I'm a moderate. Man.
Yeah, I'm a moderate.
Like they're good on natural law.
Yeah. No, I think so. Let's keep looking at the comments here. Can't use math since Pythagoras was an idolater. Yeah. I mean,
I don't want to spend a lot of time on the petty stuff.
No,
exactly. It's fun and it's memeable, but I'm not like I had an interaction with Fred Butler, last night.
I love Fred.
and I didn't get bogged down into these little things, although it's fun to say chapter and verse on the taxes, on the tax filing process. So I
agreed. Agreed 100%. Yeah. When we're talking about taking forcibly money from people, chapter and verse. Yeah.
I don't want to get too bogged down in that, but he continued to say, so you don't believe the Bible is authoritative?
Yeah, it's total confusion.
Man, I choose my words. I'm not always right.
Yeah.
but I did choose the word sufficient very purposefully.
Yeah.
I didn't say necessary. I didn't say authoritative.
Yeah. Yeah. If you said, the Bible is unnecessary for filing my taxes, that would be a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Not sufficient.
Yeah.
Right. I can't just look at that alone. I need to know the rules. Right. And so you're making the same, let's deal with this one. CJ is making the same argument the unbelieving higher critical scholars of the 19th century made. John is pulling on Neoplatonic thought.
Yeah, he is. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, in general, what's the phrase that Augustine used about how they we plundered the pagan warehouses or whatever, and how he Christianized. That's what the story of we talked about this with Jared Lavelle.
Yeah,
how the rising Christian movement at that time basically plundered the pagans intellectually, culturally, materially. Yeah. So I don't have a problem with utilizing. In fact, actually, I believe that God set up the intellectual soil for Christ and Christianization by giving the world the Grecian philosophers. I actually think that Christianity itself, as a metaphysical outlook on the world, was actually provided for. The soil of it was provided for by Greek and Roman philosophy, and then God used that in order to properly interpret it through the lens of Christ. So yeah, I think that's the way God works in history. I guess that leads to another topic, which is my methodology. People are like, "What else do you look?"
But his original point was that it needed to be fixed. The Greek philosophy and the Roman philosophy needed to be Christianized, and I agree. And their politics needed to be Christianized as well. The Christian nationalists don't seem interested in Christianizing the politics, because some of it you have to completely to Christianize it. Some of it you have to completely reject and say no, that's ridiculous, that's wrong. But the question comes back by the theonomist is, by what standard do we reject political responsibilities of the magistrate? By what standard do we embrace them? By what standard do we reject them?
Look at, besides the Bible, if you believe that other things are necessary. There's a lot of different things I could point to, but one of the things that I really emphasize as a Burkean is history. I believe,
and that's a little bit of my problem too. When we're talking about law, and we're talking about forcing people, and because that's what a law does. It forces people to act a certain way. If it doesn't force people, it's just a suggestion. Okay, that's not a law, right? So we're talking about power dynamics, and we're talking about the power and the responsibility of the civil magistrate and what he should be doing, and making laws and things like that. He's arguing from a perspective as a Burkean. But is he going to be Burkean in 10 years? He's already talking about he used to be a libertarian. What if he, embraces something that's outside of Christian nationalism in 10 years? What about all the systems he was arguing for? Are they now incorrect? I guess he's saying that the libertarian perspective is wrong. But now he's a Burkean. And so with the Christian nationalists, there's an ever-changing standard that whoever is at the top is the one who gets to enforce whatever type of insert, popular politician of whatever age or ever country here type of politics on the entire population. But justice doesn't change. Justice doesn't change over time. People's perception of it does, but God's word and authority on justice is always the same. And our responsibility is always the same, to do justice. And if we adopt and you say, I follow Paul, or I follow Peter, or I follow Burke, that is not sufficient for our understanding of politics. I'm going to argue that's irrelevant. If Burke never existed, CJ, you have enough. You have enough for I think the term you used earlier was to live well in the natural world. You have enough to understand what the common good is. You have enough to do justice, and you have enough to establish an ordered and peaceful society. That's what the Bible claims. That we're equipped for every good work, all things that pertain to life and godliness. All of your ways, O Lord, I consider to be right. We have shown you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with God. You have enough. If Burke never existed, you still have enough. Ultimately, Aristotle, Burke, Aquinas, they're irrelevant to the discussion of what the responsibility of the civil magistrate is. So I'm going to leave it there. They go into audience questions and they say the things that, I'm sure I'd be outraged at, and I can't believe it, and blah 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 blah. But these guys are definitely honest, and they're working through these things. And I hope I wasn't rude or disrespectful to them. But I just strongly disagree with their whole foundation for their looking at political ideology, the role of the magistrate. And I mean, I am a Christian nationalist in the sense, if Christian nationalism means that a Christian nationalist is anyone who wants their nation to be a Christian nation, then every theonomist by definition is a Christian nationalist. But it just seems to be heading in a direction of use the political system to get your guy in power and give him even more power than what our founding fathers gave them. Let's do George. It just seems really, let's do George III again at best. At worst, let's do the Pope again. The Christian prince. I mean, George III was the Christian prince. He was doing everything that these guys want the Christian prince to do, and he was, if you read the Declaration of Independence and all the problems that they had that George III was doing, my question to the Christian nationalists is, if George III said I was doing it for the common good, does that make it right? Did the founding fathers do something wrong if George III came back and said, hey, all these things that quartering troops in your house, listen, I got to suspend your rights for a little bit to restore order and peace. That's my responsibility. You guys are being disorderly. Lexington and Concord, you're being disorderly. And it's my responsibility to maintain and establish order. And so if I have to suspend your rights to do it, then that's what I got to do. Right? I'm a Christian prince. Look at his oath. He was a Christian prince, and he's doing everything that these guys want him to do. But that's not how America was born. We ascended England in freedom and liberty. We got past them. We surpassed them because we decentralized the power structure instead of it resting on one person. But unfortunately, eventually, I mean, we had peace, prosperity for a little while, and I really do think it was because of the Puritans. Because I think without the Puritans, I think we would have had the French Revolution. But what we traded was one tyrant 3,000 miles away to 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away. That's what we have, unfortunately. We didn't get to the heart of the matter. We delayed tyranny. But the Constitution did not secure liberty for us and for our posterity. But I want to know what the Christian nationalists would have said to George III if he said, "Hey, I'm just trying to do this for the common good." And what standard would they say? This is not for the common good. Because in Stephen Wolf's book, if the civil magistrate has to suspend rights for the common good, he's justified in doing it if he uses extreme caution and wisdom. And someone tell me that George III wasn't doing that. Well, folks, thanks for listening to the Think and Reform podcast. I think next time I'm going to talk about immigration again. I don't want to be known as like the immigration guy, but Phil Kaiser put out another paper, and I want to take a look at that and talk about that a little bit. So hopefully I'll get that one out soon. So thanks everyone for listening, and thanks CJ and Andrew for talking about these things and working through them, and for putting your content out there for people to talk about. So thanks everyone. We'll see you next time. And remember, my friends, think and reform.